Well, it's time now for one of my favorite moments of the parliamentary year. This is our chance to sit back and take a long, hard look at the parliamentary sitting as it comes to a close. And this is, of course, is a special look as the House of Commons may not sit again before the fall election. Joining me with their thoughts and observations are three intrepid colleagues from the Parliamentary Press Gallery. Bob Fife is the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail. Kristy Kirkup is a national reporter with the Canadian Press. And Kady O'Malley is a veteran Hill watcher and contributor to iPolitics. All three of you, thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
This is a great, I don't know, I just have a lot of fun with this one because it's a chance to get your thoughts on a lot of stuff. And we're going to start with what's perennially the first question, and that is, what do you think was the biggest or most important or most newsworthy issue or event? Bob?
Well, it won't surprise you if I say the SNC-Lavalin scandal was the most important story of this year. For not so much because of the attempt to, by the Prime Minister's office to interfere in a criminal case involving a very important Quebec company, but the political fallout from it. Okay. The loss of two cabinet ministers, Jody Wilson-Raybould, Jane Philpott, the Prime Minister's most trusted advisor, Jerry Butts, and of course the Clerk of the Privy Council, Mark Warnick. And we've seen that since that Liberal support at first had dropped 10 percentage points. They're now they've gone up about 5 points, but they're still 5 points by all polls behind the Conservatives. So this has been a game changer for a story.
Okay. Kristy, your nomination for most important or biggest issue or event?
Well, of course, beyond SNC-Lavalin, I think that climate change has become a huge issue this spring, especially because it's become such a timely issue. We have, for example, flooding or had flooding in different parts of the country. And so this really fueled the conversation around what I think will be a key election issue, which is what to do about climate change. We know that one-off floods do not constitute climate change, but when you look at the sum of events, that's when experts will be pointing out that this, this is a huge concern. And even, insurance companies, for example, are already starting to speak up about, the insurability of homes and how the unpredictable nature of our climate moving forward is actually going to be a huge problem. And so this is dogged the government in terms of what are they actually going to do about this issue. Millennials, especially younger people, have been speaking out about this. So I think it's a huge issue this spring, again, given what's happened, and it will also be a really huge issue leading into the campaign.
And we saw Andrew Scheer obliged before the last week of Parliament to actually come forward with the long-awaited some details of their environmental policy. Kady, your choice for biggest issue.
So I'm agreeing with Bob. I think that the thing about the SNC-Lavalin scandal is you can argue over whether it was, it deserved to have the impact it did, but it is the only story I can think of under this government where there is a before and an after. We remember life before the SNC-Lavalin story broke by Bob, and we remember what happened afterwards. So it was really this, it marked a turning point. Also, it revealed so much about how, something that we'd seen in the past, but how inefficient this government was at managing a defensive message. They were caught, sort of off guard. It took them weeks to sort of put together a response to seem less rattled, and I think that contributed to a lot of this sort of the domino effect of what happened. So it wasn't just the story itself, which, as Bob says, was sort of about a very significant issue all on its own, but it was also the way the government mishandled and failed to kind of appreciate the significance.
I'll tell my 2 cents worth. You could also remember that first week after the story was published and the Prime Minister in Vancouver at a public housing event, and he was asked about the story, and he said, well, the proof that Jody Wilson-Raybould still supports me is that she's still in the cabinet. And then the next day, she had to resign.
It was the highest political drama I can recall in Canadian history in quite a while. Like just in terms of the day-to-day changes and plot twists.
Which allows me to segue into another topic: most impressive minister. And I thought there was going to be some mischievous answers here this year, but Bob, you're...
Well, first of all, we don't have the most impressive cabinet, and the old-timers like Ralph Goodale and Mark Garneau still stand out. But in terms of the rookie ministers, by far, I think it's Chrystia Freeland. She deserves high marks for shepherding the NAFTA agreement through. This was our most important thing that had to be accomplished, and she did it, and we came out pretty well. Now she's she's turning her attention to the second most important issue we have now is China, and I'm glad it's in her hands and not somebody else.
Okay, Kristy.
Yeah, I have to agree. Chrystia Freeland is a very, very hard worker. And for example, when she was at the last G20 in Buenos Aires, I was on that trip, and you can just tell how very engaged she is. She's working around the clock. This was, for example, when at the 11th hour, there were questions about a signing ceremony that was happening on the sidelines of the G20. And you know, she has worked, and other officials as well, in Washington to really try and make friends and influence people in order to get this deal done. Then there was the removal of the steel and aluminum tariffs, which of course was another big win. And again, they're tracking towards ratification. So I think that people actually forget sometimes. After Donald Trump became president in 2016, there was great concern about what, how Justin Trudeau would handle this, how the Trudeau cabinet would handle this. And I think having such a skilled foreign affairs minister, that has really helped Trudeau manage the unpredictability of the Trump administration.
I will remind our viewers that in the fall when we did this panel, it was 3 for 3. 3 journalists agreed back in the fall that the most impressive minister was Chrystia Freeland. But as a great trooper that she is, Kady has agreed to diversify your answers.
I did. For the record, I had Chrystia Freeland first, but I actually, my second choice, my alternate choice would be Ralph Goodale, the warhorse. And honestly, the reason why is I have this, one of the things I have to do a lot of is tracking legislation, where it is, sort of what's critical. And I would find myself going through the list of mission critical bills that were moving through the House of Commons, and like 3/4 of them were introduced by Ralph Goodale. In terms of, there was national security, there was the pot pardon bill, there were, there was the solitary confinement bill. I mean, these were huge issues that it was, I think, the fact that he handled them so deftly in such an understated way that we almost didn't realize this stuff was going on. Whereas if he had been a less experienced minister and one who didn't have that kind of stability, any of these could have turned into a complete 4-star alarm fire. So I'll say that he perhaps gets overlooked because he is so predictably competent, but I think you should still get to be most impressive minister, even if you're not necessarily, as flashy.
Trivia question: is he the senior minister in terms of ministerial experience? I think
he would have to
He's done everything.
Yeah,
he's done finance. He's done House leader. That's why he can get stuff. Knows how to get stuff through Parliament.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. Let's look at something which is always good because it's a chance to talk about something that you didn't feel was covered enough, the most undercovered, or you could even say neglected issue, an issue that you don't feel was, I don't know, got the attention that it could have. Bob.
Well, for me, I think it's been Huawei, and I only say this because Jason and I have been writing a lot of stories on Huawei's attempt to, along with the help of Canada's 2 major telecoms, BCE and TELUS, to get Canada to allow Huawei to have 5G technology in this country. And it is a very serious issue. The Americans are very serious about saying, if you do that, we may not share sensitive intelligence with you. We've seen our other 5 allies, including Australia and New Zealand, have joined the Americans in blacklisting Huawei. But this is a story, from my point of view, which very few people covered, for whatever reason, I don't know. And it only kind of got some attention because of the arrest of the Huawei chief executive officer or chief financial officer, Meng Wanzhou, who's the daughter of the founder, and that sort of picked up. But just when Mr. Pence, Vice President Pence, was here last month, he made again the case to the Prime Minister, you got to bar this. Yeah. And in yesterday's Oval Office meeting with the Prime Minister, the President made the same point.
And speaking of Ralph Goodale, he's been seized with that issue on many an occasion.
And he's so good at it, you never know, you can never nail him down on anything.
Okay, Kristy, what would you say has been the most undercovered issue, or one that you would have liked to have seen better covered?
We know that a lot of experts are calling the opioid crisis an epidemic. This is a crisis that is affecting communities right across the country. Of course, we know that Western provinces are kind of seen as the epicenter, particularly British Columbia as well as Alberta, seen as the epicenter of this crisis. But I think that, there are really key calls for Justin Trudeau to make some policy changes, which he has yet to do. do. For example, a lot of advocates and experts agree there's two things that need to be done. And actually, one of his own MPs has been speaking up in the House, Nathaniel Erskine Smith, putting forward a private member's bill on the issue of decriminalizing small possession. Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott, when they were Justice and Health Ministers, they went to Portugal and they looked at the fact that Portugal has actually decriminalized small possession, and there's this push for Trudeau to do just that here. He has not been willing to go there, and also the issue of providing what's called safe supply, because the street supply is seen as being contaminated with fentanyl and other analogs. So I think this is a massive issue. We're talking about thousands upon thousands of Canadians from all different walks of life who have lost their lives, and there are some really key policy issues that the government has been asked about, and it's not willing to open that door.
Okay, Kady, undercovered.
Yeah, so, and again, I think both of my colleagues have picked brilliant ones, and I'd love to read more about both of those issues, particularly the opioid crisis. I agree with Kristy completely. It is something that is so severe in terms of what's happening. But I went with an old favorite, which is the prospect of election interference and the state of our democracy. I know, I seem to say this all the time, but it does feel like we do cover it in the moment. When something's happened, there'll be this sort of frenzy of discussion over, Facebook, privacy, ads, this and that. And then it kind of lapses for a bit. And I do worry, as we're heading into a campaign, that the Canadian public may still not be quite I don't want to say alarmed enough, but quite prepared enough for the kind of things that we're going to see in social media, online, in terms of this sort of both foreign interference from other countries, also Canadians getting involved and dirty tricks here back home. So all of these things, I feel like with an election coming up, the first one that's taking place in this sort of hypersensitive context of the interference, I just feel like we gotta hammer it home even more.
Okay, this is one that gives you a chance to get something off your chest, most overcovered issue. And it's not an indictment against your colleagues, it's just something you found was just a lot of coverage of. Bob.
Well, I thought we overcovered the Alberta election campaign. We made it out as if this was some great contest between Jason Kenney and the NDP premier, what's her name?
Rachel Notley.
Rachel Notley, poor my God. And Rachel Notley. When in fact there was no chance in hell she was going to ever beat Jason Kenney. Once he united the Conservative parties, and Alberta is a Conservative province, regularly votes Conservatives, there was no contest here, and yet we made it into a horse race, which I think was a disservice to readers and viewers on television, because this was he was always leading by large numbers, and then as we came to voting day, there were even some polls suggesting that the race had really narrowed, and it was, Rachel Notley had a chance, when of course the results showed that they got wiped out.
Yeah. All right, that's simple enough. Kristy, what do you find maybe a bit overcovered?
I think that specifically a lot of people kept talking about, a lot of commentators saying, what is Jody Wilson-Raybould's end game? She must have an end game. She must have a goal. And then when she announced, both she and Jane Philpott announced that they were running as independents, it was kind of like that really took the air out of the balloon in terms of this notion that she somehow had this overarching goal by speaking out and delivering her marathon 4-hour testimony when she was, alleging, again, this issue of political interference in a criminal prosecution. So I think that dimension of the SNC Lavalin story received a tremendous amount of coverage.
You mean the hidden agenda or the ulterior motive?
That she, and she sat down in an interview with me and said, she has made it clear she didn't have an end game, and I think that really was reinforced when she announced that she was going to be seeking, running as an independent again. What was the end game? Well, she's going to run under no banner at all, and it's going to be an uphill battle. And she and Jane Philpott know that. But what was her end game? It wasn't about a political game that she was playing, or a strategy.
Okay, Kady.
Yeah, so mine is actually very similar to Kristy. It's this we basically turned the SNC Lavalin story, which had so many fascinating policy implications and legal implications and political implications. That's also fair game. But we almost turned it into a soap opera. It was just high drama. It was like Game of Thrones. And I do think we ended up attributing motivation to a lot of people that was perhaps not actually there. And Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott definitely being two people who were seen, as Kristy says, there was sort of speculation of what is their end. Is this a goal? Is this a cunning plan? Are they going to somehow take down the government? And we did it in other ways as well, just in terms of the way we were covering the personalities. And I think that in some ways, we may not have served the Canadian public as well as we could by focusing on the personalities as opposed to the actual controversy and the issue in contention.
So you obviously didn't see our CPAC 12-part series on the Shawcroft doctrine.
And Shawcroft was great, but I mean, even what was actually being alleged was fascinating. But
I say that in jest.
We literally turned it into Game of Thrones, and it was probably not serving the public as well as we could have.
I don't think Ottawa has been more abuzz with all of the issues that it raised. It was incredibly intriguing. Okay, let's look at something, because I think this is really, I've had the pleasure over the last 3 weeks, this will be our last week on this show, of saying goodbye to some MPs who have been very, very impressive by their character or by their work or by their commitment or just by their interesting anecdotes. MPs who will be missed either by their colleagues or by the Parliamentary Press Gallery or by you personally. Anyone you will miss as a character, someone who's not running again. Bob?
Well, there are a lot of really good MPs that are leaving, and so it's kind of hard to pick out one.
Yeah.
But one of my favorites is Nathan Cullen, the NDP member from Northern BC. He's a very serious guy with a great sense of humor. He's one of these sharp guys, sort of like a Jason Kenney or Brian Tobin, like this for politics. He's so smart. But his heart is in the right place, and he's not a mean. There's not a mean bone in that guy's body. At least I have not seen him in the House of Commons being mean or either in or outside. He's got a good reputation across the aisle. He's got a good reputation, I think, with members of the media. I've always liked him because he was kind of a go-to person I could go to. He would return your phone calls, and he was very knowledgeable on almost all the issues I raised with him. And so, you know, he's a guy I'm going to miss. But there are other really great guys, like on the Conservative side, for example, Larry Miller. Down to earth, no nonsense, just a farmer, a smart guy.
Barometer of the caucus.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll let your colleagues choose two more. Kristy?
Murray Rankin, also from the NDP caucus, as a former law professor, and just, you know, he brings a tremendous amount of knowledge to Parliament. And he actually was a great speaker. If you ever saw him get up and deliver a speech in the House of Commons, I know this is a nerdy thing to say, and we would like to think, you know, we're always listening to what's going on in the House. But whenever I would see him get up and deliver a speech, I would always take the time to tune in, because he would always have some really, really well thought out arguments, and bringing that, you know, again, that kind of legal prowess and background and experience to the House of Commons to really enrich the debate. And so I think he'll be missed.
And Justice Committee too, very civil in the most heated moments of the SNC leveling.
Very important. He was sat on the public safety,
Public Security
Security
the high
Committee,
secret
which
one,
is a highly secret one. That's the kind of faith people have in him.
Okay, it's no secret who Kady has chosen as president.
I've chosen David Christopherson, also a New Democrat. I promise we didn't coordinate this. But he was actually in Ontario. He was Solicitor General in Bob Rae's then NDP government. He has a lot of experience. I got to know him and sort of watched him a lot on Procedure and House Affairs. And what really struck me, first of all, he is a great orator as well. It's too late now to say it, but as with Murray Rankin, he would stand up in the House and speak, and it was just that old style prairie socialism. Like it was amazing. It was like going back in time to when speeches were good. But he also had an amazing knack for sort of focusing on the inherently ridiculous in a political proposal, and he would sort of clarify, and he would speak very plainly and very naturally, and very with a lot of passion. And the man could filibuster like no one's business. He kept so many committees going for so long just by being himself.
And after every Auditor General's report, you'd always wait for him, because he'd come out to the microphone and he would have wonderful quotes. Okay, we're going to have to move quickly because we're running out of time. Biggest surprise. I love this one. Something that took you by surprise. Bob. And we'll have to be brief because we're running out of time.
To me, it was the government's purchase of the TMX pipeline. I had not expected that they were going to put up $4.5 billion to buy this pipeline. I think it took the whole country by shock. Okay,
Kristy, biggest surprise, briefly.
Essentially, the way that Trudeau fumbled the response to the SNC Lavalin controversy. It was, you know, a daily national news headline for some 6 weeks, if not longer.
2 months.
It was it was baffling that it took that long.
Okay, Kady.
I'm going with the fact that we are right now, and a large part because of the SNC-Lavalin affair, going into an incredibly close election. This time last year, it really didn't seem as though the Liberals were going to have all that much trouble kind of romping to a second round in Parliament with ease. The question was, would the NDP survive? Will the Conservatives manage to get it back together? Now we're in a really tight race, and it's fascinating to me, and also the rise of the Greens, which has been sort of creeping up and burbling over the years, but I think it's really only in the last 6 months or so that it's become to the point where there are polls that show them ahead of the NDP, at least nationally, which is astonishing when you think about it. So yeah, that's the one that I really didn't predict.
Okay, I'm going to skip ahead to the obvious question because we are on the eve of an election. And so if you have to look ahead, we know that already, because we have a fixed election dates now, we are in pre-election mode. Already, even in January, some commentators were saying it's a countdown. So if you had to choose one issue or theme for the fall election, what would it be?
It's hard to predict because elections take a life of their own.
Yeah.
But normally what happens is it's usually almost always the economy, stupid, that dominates, and the reasons why people will go and vote. It looks like, because of SNC-Lavalin, that ethics in government could be a key determining factor in this election campaign. Nick Nanos did a poll for the Globe and Mail last week, showed, and I was surprised by this, 73% of Canadians said that they would be influenced by ethics in government. 66% said the economy, 54% carbon tax, and all go down there. So this is the issue I would watch for.
Interesting. You could argue that because a lot of the economic indicators are good, people might turn to something else. Kristy, what do you think will be the biggest issue?
I think it will, or one of the big issues, I don't want to create a hierarchy, but one of the bigger issues I think will be how Conservative premiers like Jason Kenney and Doug Ford stir the pot, specifically going back to my original point about climate change and the environment being so key to this election, and the existential conversation about a carbon tax. We saw Andrew Scheer say, of course, that he is not in favor of a carbon tax. He claims emissions down without a carbon tax. And I think that he will be getting some help from his friends on that score.
And the decision whether or not they take an active role in the federal or around election time, because you have Doug Ford deciding to maybe play a lower profile. Kady, I want to give the last word to you on this, because you're being contrarian on this.
Yes, because I asked permission. I sought and was granted permission to say I cannot predict. Anything I say is going to turn out to be ludicrously wrong, because as Bob said,
we can't hold that against you.
Elections do take on a life of their own. Issues come back. They sometimes disappear entirely. I'm not sure if we'll be talking about SNC-Lavalin. I suspect we will be talking about ethics in general as a government issue, but you never know. Elections end up being fought over the oddest things, and to try to predict them is just a fool's game.
So we'll keep the tape on that.
She's absolutely right.
Exactly. I always say we'll keep the tape on that. We'll keep the tape on darned if I know. Okay, that's a legitimate answer. I want to thank all three of you for coming in. Thanks for sharing your wisdom, even your non-committal wisdom. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you.